And he's like, if you want to feel completely out of touch with the world, try watching a 40-year-old documentary on an almost 40-year-old documentary on the 1984 Olympics while stoned at 5 a.m.
It was fun.
Not a bad hang, just disconnected.
Yeah. Welcome to I'd Buy That for $1, a podcast about inexpensive, common, and underappreciated records that are waiting to be rediscovered. I'm your host, Sean Hartman, author of the new book, The Pinnacle of Fashion, A History of the Canadian Tuxedo from Bing Crosby to George McCrae.
Can't wait to add that to my library of books by Sean Hartman.
Yeah, a steadily growing library.
Yeah, he's actually in the middle of building a second shelf here right now, I can say, as someone in the room with him.
Yeah. Is Springsteen in it? He's a Canadian tuxedo guy, right?
Oh, he gets featured, don't worry.
Okay, cool. I'm co-host Jeremy, and we're recording this in the year 2024, in case you're listening in the future. Big year for beefs, right, guys?
True.
Yeah.
A lot of big beefs out there, answer songs left and right. You know, it was not a good year for beefs. 50 years ago, 1974, when George McCrae wrote Rock Your Baby.
He didn't write it.
Well,
he performed it. He recorded it.
Even better reason for there to be some beef, let me tell you. But then Gwen McCrae responds with the answer song Rocking Chair, which, you know, could be juicy because they're husband and wife, but instead it's like all lovey-dovey.
I was going to see, it seemed juicy to me, but you mean in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wanted a husband and wife beefing.
Yes. That's what I want from my answer songs. I want beef in them.
That's what we want in our entertainment nowadays.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, I'm co-host Peter Cook, and with so much drama in the IBT, it's kind of hard being co-host Peter C., but I somehow, some way, keep coming up with funky-ass podcasts like every single day.
Ooh, silky smooth.
We do appreciate you for it.
I'm glad to be appreciated. And joining us today, returning to the podcast for, I don't know, I've lost count, is
Me too.
a Canadian podcaster who always brings the jams to the podcast here. Welcome back, Lauren Ram.
Hey, happy to be here again. I think it's maybe the 6th time, but I've also lost track. But happy to be bringing the jams for sure.
The heat, the jams. Yeah.
The heat. That's right.
Always enjoy your selections, Lauren. Why don't you go ahead and introduce it for our listeners?
Yeah. So I brought Rock Your Baby by George McCrae, which was released in 1974. And I'm sure many listeners know it as a real one-hit wonder. Rock Your Baby was a huge, huge hit, which sort of ushered in the disco era, commercial disco era. I think it's also a pretty good record. Like there are some, you know, it's got that one-hit wonder, but there's some other jams in there as well. I found this record because of Yo La Tengo's cover of You Can Have It All, which is a cover of a song on this record. Record scratch.
You're blowing the minds of many Yo La Tengo fans, I imagine.
Oh, I love to do that. Yeah.
I only learned in the last couple of years that was a cover.
That it was a cover of a George McCrae song, or that?
Yeah, I did.
Okay,
I did not know the George McCrae original. I've known the Yo La Tengo song for like 20 years.
You know, it's funny. We can talk all we want about how awful the algorithm is, and I'm happy to have that conversation. But it was the Spotify algorithm that got that song on my on a playlist many years ago, and I was like, wow, this sounds really familiar. And then I put two and two together and was like, oh, this is a completely different version. Oh, it's the original. Wow, that's crazy. But Rock Your Baby, which is the title track on this album, is a song I feel I've sort of always known about. It's like one of those songs that's kind of in the ether. It's such a massive hit, and it was a template for a lot of disco music that followed. So I listened to You Can Have It All. I went back and listened to the rest of the record, and I was like, that's a song I've definitely heard before, but I have no idea when that was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say we'll go ahead and play that big hit in just a moment. But I will just say that I think I messaged Sean, because Sean was the one who had put this on our list that we send a guest of potential albums. Then you selected it from that list. And when I started listening to the album in preparation, I was like, wait, 1974? I thought this was like late 70s. It's it's the template for much that followed in the 70s. So let's...
It was ahead of its time.
Absolutely. So let's listen to Rock Your Baby, Side A, Track 1.
I still remember when I first heard this album. It was sometime probably around 2009, digging around some music blog spots on the internet, finding obscure music to play on my college radio show. And someone had posted about this album, which at the time I'd never heard of, so I assumed it must be some ridiculously obscure thing. And the artwork just, of course, immediately intrigued me. If a guy could look this cool, what kind of music is he making, you know? That was obviously the first song I heard, first song on the album, and was just instantly hooked. It has this amazing, very funky but delicate feel to it. That early drum machine is such a cool touch, and I love a good male falsetto vocal lead. The whole thing, it's pure sunshine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the drum machine is definitely a standout element of this recording. This was a pretty early use of a drum machine on a recording. I looked a little bit into the history of drum machines on recordings, and some of the earliest instances was that psychedelic group that were synthesizer heavy, the United States of America, on their 1968 self-titled album.
Such a good record.
Yeah, that's a fantastic record. We could never feature it on the show.
No, never. It's definitely more than $1.
The first major pop song to use a drum machine was Saved by the Bell by Robin Gibb of the Bee Gees. And also, Sly and the Family Stone used it on the album There's a Riot Going On in 1971.
Oh my God. I'm sorry. I have to interrupt and say in my notes, I literally wrote, reminds me a lot of Africa Talks to You from Sly and the Family Stones. There's a Riot Going On, which is one of my favorite albums
Uh-huh.
of all time. But as soon as I heard that, I was like, what is this instrument? And I looked into it. Apparently it's called the Lowry organ, and it was used on, so this is a record from TK Records. And this organ was used on the label's first single, Why Can't We Live Together by Timmy Thomas, which was sampled by Drake in Hotline Bling. And this very same organ, like the very same one, not just the same brand, was used to create the drum machine sound in this song we just heard. It's had some mileage.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned you're making all kinds of references already, Lauren. You mentioned Drake, relevant to the beef that some of the beefs of 2024 that Jeremy mentioned.
Also, someone who wears the Canadian tuxedo, also a purveyor of that fashion, as a fellow Canadian.
And you mentioned There's a Riot Going On by Sly and the Family Stone, which, of course, Yo La Tengo also released an album called There's a Riot Going On.
Wow.
Oh, damn.
It's all connected.
Wow. We should end the podcast here. This is just, It's all come full circle already.
Yep. We can't get any better.
No.
Let's sign off right here.
Absolutely.
So we mentioned that this song was a hit, but I don't know if we emphasized just how big of a hit this was. It was a worldwide #1 hit. It hit number 1 in at least 9 countries, and it hit number 2 in Australia and number 3 in Ireland. So all over the world, people were hearing the vocals of George McCrae. And as Jeremy mentioned, it was made such an impact that it required his wife at the time, Gwen McCrae, to record a response song, Rockin' Chair, which was a #1 soul hit. I don't think it was quite as worldwide across the board, but it was, it sort of rode the coattails of that.
Yeah, great song, by the way. The answer song, Rockin' Chair.
Yeah, I checked it out. Absolutely. I wasn't familiar with that one prior to doing research for this episode. I know that John Lennon admitted to using Rock Your Baby as the inspiration for his song that he did with Elton John, Whatever Gets You Through the Night. It has a similar chord progression.
No way.
So, yeah, I mean, just, some of the biggest musicians in the world are hearing this and saying, I wish I was doing something like that.
There's something here.
Well, I looked into it as well in terms of like how successful this song is. Because like I said earlier, like I don't remember a time when I didn't know this song. Like it's just so, ubiquitous. And it sold more than 10 million physical copies worldwide, which I think is a pretty big deal, not just in terms of numbers, but like this is back in the day when people actually bought singles records. But to put it in perspective, other singles on this list include The Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand, Britney Spears' Baby One More Time, YMCA by the Village People, and the Macarena. Like that's how big this song was in 1974.
Yeah, only just a little over 30 singles have sold more than 10 million copies, physical copies. We're talking, like you said, in the days when physical copies were pressed up and purchased.
Yeah, so it's a pretty significant piece of music history. It really signaled the commercial viability of disco music.
And I would also add, is in the lineage of songs, the sound kind of sweet and innocent, but are just filthy if you actually listen to the lyrics.
A proud tradition.
Proud tradition.
Yeah, so I looked into it because I, obviously for this podcast, but we've all heard this song, but I didn't really know very much about George McCrae and sort of what led to him recording this, because it's like he had this song and he had a few other hits and a few other records after this, but apparently he was a session musician and he was about to give up on music to pursue a career in law enforcement. But then at TK Records, he was working there as a session musician. I guess his wife at the time, Gwen McCrae, he was working as her manager and she was signed to that label. But Casey and the Sunshine Band, the founders, Richard Finch, and Harry Wayne Casey, aka Casey in the Sunshine Band, they asked him to record Rock Your Baby because it was in his vocal range. So
Yeah, well, it was supposed to be for Gwen,
right,
and
yeah.
she was late to the session.
That's
so
right.
her husband / manager ends up recording. I can see why that should have been a beef response,
Yeah.
Jeremy.
Totally. Yeah. It's crazy because, like, yeah, I guess he got there first or something, and then
You can imagine, like, the Casey and the Sunshine Band people are sitting around going, all right, George, when's Gwen going to be here? They didn't have cell phones then. Oh, she'll be right along. And, well, George, you can sing too. Oh, hold on, she'll be right along. You're like probably not wanting to, start trouble in paradise there. But
right.
eventually, if she didn't show and they have the session booked, they got to record something.
Just imagine, like, she's stuck in traffic and, like, that's the reason she didn't record the song and become a multimillionaire.
I mean, at least it was her husband, so hopefully the money was shared.
Well, I don't think they're together anymore, but yeah, maybe.
Well, they were done by 1976, so
More reason for beef tracks.
Yeah. But yeah, this entire album is just songs written by Richard Finch and Harry Wayne Casey. So George is just like it's like that butterfly effect. He was like at the right place at the right time, and like it completely changed his life. Instead of becoming a police officer, he became a very well off, very successful performer.
What a strange sliding doors moment.
Totally.
You either become a police officer or the singer of Rock Your Baby.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, I think he has a really incredible vocal range. Like, I think Gwen would have been a great candidate to sing this song as well. But he really does have a great, he does have some like soaring high notes on the next track I want to play as well. I think he's the man for the job.
Yeah, we've mentioned it a few times. Should we introduce and play that next song?
Let's do it. Let's play it.
So this is the song made famous to college rock snobs by Yo La Tengo on their 2000 album, And Then Nothing Turned Itself Inside Out. And that is where I'm sure many people first heard it, myself included, Lauren as well. You Can Have It All, Side A, track 4.
Performed by aspiring cop and luckiest man in the world, George McCrae.
Take it, baby. You can have it all. If you want my love, take it, baby. If you want my heart, take it, baby.
I think that song really does capture his beautiful voice. And you can just kind of imagine him in the studio playing or singing Rock Your Baby and then being like, yeah, this is the hit. This is the version we want. I think that You Could Have It All is a great example of his vocal range, his incredible vocal range.
Agreed. And it was released as a single, but it failed to chart anywhere except the UK, where it hit number 23. The Yola Tango version that's one of my favorite Yola Tango tracks, and so I was baffled to learn that it was a cover. And Georgia sings that one, except I think both Ira and James, the other main members, are throughout the song also vocalizing throughout it. And so they're all kind of trading off. And then towards the end, these string parts, like a cello, come in, and they really made it their own, I will say, when they covered it. I think both versions are phenomenal.
Definitely. I think their version is, much more pared down, slowed down version. I mean, it's a very simple song, even George's version is, but I think the Yola Tango version is there's something very romantic about it. I feel like we mentioned earlier, it's like a song that's on the surface seems really innocent, but is actually quite dirty, quite filthy.
I thought we were saying that of Rock Your Baby.
Oh, but I think this one is as well.
Yeah.
But because of the way Yola Tango does it, it's much more romantic, I think.
Yeah, they got that whole ba 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 ba.
That's right.
Throughout
It's a beautiful song. It's a great slow dance song for sure. Yeah, I wanted to say that, like, when you folks asked me back on the pod and I chose this record to feature, I hadn't really listened to it in a while. I hadn't really gone too deep into the into the George McCrae catalog. And I forgot that a lot of the songs on this record sound a lot like rehashes of Rock Your Baby. There's even a Rock Your Baby reprise, but songs like Look at You and Make It Right. And I just get the idea that they saw dollar signs after the single, and so, after Rock Your Baby, and they probably did maybe a bit of a rush job with a lot of the tracks. You Can Have It All as a real standout track because of his voice. Rock Your Baby was released as a single, did phenomenally well, better than anyone could have expected. And they're like, get back in the studio, record an album. Oh God, we have to get this ball rolling. We got to get this out there. So, but after that, it's George McCrae didn't really have a second major success after that.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, it's effectively a Casey and the Sunshine Band album with George McCrae fronting the band. They wrote all the songs and they're performing. They're the backing band on it. And it's happening, from what I looked into, it's happening almost simultaneously to Casey and the Sunshine Band starting to actually commercially release recordings as Casey and the Sunshine Band. Mm-hmm. So it's all kind of happening at once over at TK Records there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would we like to, at this point, learn a little more about George McCrae?
Absolutely.
Yes, please.
So George Warren McCrae Jr. was born in West Palm Beach, Florida on October 19th, 1944, the same day as late Jamaican musician Peter Tosh.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah, same day, same year. And George is 1 year to the day older than country singer Jeannie C. Riley of Harper Valley PTA fame.
Oh, damn.
Another artist mainly known for one song.
Yeah.
As a teenager, George formed his own singing group, the Jivin' Jets, before joining the Navy when he was 18. In 1963, he met a club singer 1 year older than him named Gwen Mosley, and the two were married within 1 week.
Whoa.
Wow.
Quick decision.
Yeah. Yeah. She was ready to be Gwen McCrae. After George was discharged, the couple briefly worked together in a reformed lineup of the Jivin' Jets, but soon they began performing as a duo all around South Florida. In 1967, they were discovered by singer Betty Wright, who helped them land a deal as a duo with Henry Stone and Steve Alamo's Alston label. They recorded a few singles as George and Gwen in 1969 and 1970, and they started working with a writing team of Willie Clark and Clarence Reed. Do any of you know who Clarence Reed is better known as.
Blowfly.
That's right, body wrap progenitor Blowfly.
No. What the hell?
Yep.
Wow.
However, Gwen soon started to record as a solo artist, releasing singles through Columbia. They leased her contract with Alston out to Columbia for singles. And at that point, George acted as her manager. He kind of stepped back from performing. As Lauren said, I believe he was doing some session work. She was actually, Gwen McCrae, as a side note, was the first to release a version of the ballad You Were Always on My Mind that would be more popularly recorded as Always on My Mind by Elvis Presley, Willie Nelson, and the Pet Shop Boys, to name just a few.
Damn.
And I think Brenda Lee actually recorded it before Gwen, but Gwen's version came out first. There's a whole history behind that song. It's kind of fascinating. Her version was not a hit, however. George, meanwhile, as Lauren said, planned to return to college to study law enforcement. And then came the fateful day that he showed up for the session with Casey and the Sunshine Band, and Gwen was a no-show, and the rest is history.
Wow. What a life.
Yeah. Now, Lauren, you said that you looked into some of the other albums that he recorded for TK Records. Because I should say Alston became TK Records. It's still the same management, Henry Stone. Mm-hmm. That's still his label. Yeah. So you looked into some more that was going on with George and the label.
Yeah. I don't think that I don't know that all of these labels or records that he released after were on TK Records.
No, he left that label in the late 70s.
Gotcha. Yeah, he released a few other albums after this monumental record, but nothing came close to the success. And so he had a self-titled record released in 1975, which charted. It was the year after, I think, after this one. It's a pretty mid record. It's not great. It's not terrible. It's fine. And then he released a record with his wife at the time, Gwen McCrae. Yeah, they did a track called I'll Do That Rockin', which is basically a duet remake of Rock Your Baby. Lots of disco elements, and it showcases Gwen's like really incredible voice. I went a little deep into his catalog. And for listeners who are interested, it's on Spotify. They can find George McCrae's song Breathless, which is from his album With All My Heart. You're in for a real treat. It features Vivaldi's Four Seasons with a simple synth and percussion backdrop. It is incredibly cheesy, incredibly terrible, but also really memorable and maybe a little delightful as well. But yeah, it's clear that Rock Your Baby made him a lot of money and really buoyed the rest of his career.
Yeah, I checked out just a little bit of his later work, and I don't even know exactly what album I was listening to. He stopped releasing albums in the late 70s for several years until the mid 80s, because he and Gwen had gotten divorced in 1976. He's remarried a couple times. He's lived in Canada and the Netherlands, but by the mid 1980s he started releasing albums again, and he was putting an album out every few years. Mm-hmm. His most recent one is 2016's Love, so he within the last 10 years he's still released new recordings. But I found some of it sounded cheesy, but George still has his voice. Mm-hmm. And that voice, it works over no matter how cheesy the production or the backing track is. It's George. It's just a splendid voice to hear. I found that, as you said, like some of his recording that followed this up was maybe a bit mid, and maybe that's the case for some of his other albums and material that he's recorded, but his voice is always a pleasure to listen to.
Yeah, the soul is undeniable.
Yeah, he's always going to sell it, I feel like.
For sure. And
that was evident on his 2017 performance on the BBC's Hootenanny, hosted by Jules Holland. That's worth watching because he performs Rock Your Baby and knocks it out of the park.
He would be incredible to see live, I think. I'm sure he tours still.
Yeah, I mean, on the Jules Holland thing, he was getting the crowd into it, and he was like still a great showman, hitting those high notes. It would be really fun to see him live. And I gotta say too, like Gwen McCrae kept recording like after the divorce and after this. It's not like she missed the session and no one heard from her again. In fact, Gwen has been sampled more times than George throughout her career, even though she didn't really have the same chart success that he did. And I'm just going to say it, her song, Keep the Fire Burning from 1982 is the greatest disco song of all time.
It's incredible. Yeah. Her self-titled album, it's hard to find and it's a bit pricey, but if people can find it, highly recommend. It's such a shock. It's an interesting cover. It's like her looking over a balcony. It's like dark and she's wearing this beautiful red dress. And that album is solid. Funky Sensation is one of my favorite Gwen McCrae
that's a
songs.
great track.
And it's the first track on that record. Highly recommended if listeners can find it.
Well, we should probably play another selection before we talk any more. What did you have next, Lauren?
I've got Look at You.
Another song released as a single. Unfortunately, it did not do too well. It reached number 95 on the Hot 100 in the U.S. and number 31 on the soul or R&B charts. Look at You, side B, track 1.
Look at you, so beautiful, my woman. Look at you. Look at you.
I see a star in the night. No other star shines so bright. Hey, look at you. Look at you. You're my woman, sweet woman. Oh, look at you. Look at you, you're my woman, sweet woman, standing there in your finest clothes, everlasting love that shows. Hey, look at you, you're my woman. Sweet woman, oh, look at you, you're my woman, sweet woman,
As Lauren referenced earlier in the episode, a lot of these songs kind of have a similar feel. And it's a nice summer breeze, this album. But I do have a bone to pick with that song. I couldn't get through it. Every time I listened to this album, I had to skip ahead.
Look at You.
Yeah, and the reason is a little absurd, but it's those shakers. They drive me insane. They're so loud.
Well, you know, something that I did want to mention that I didn't put in my notes and therefore was destined to forget, but you have jogged my memory, is I did notice that his voice is mixed a bit low on this album.
Yeah, his voice is low and the hi-hats are really hot, which did become a disco thing for sure. But I feel like the hi-hat's tolerable, but that shaker, oof. It was like nails on the chalkboard for me.
Jeremy has a bit of a recording engineer or producer's ear as the audio engineer of this podcast. And he's usually the one that if there's something in the mix that grates on him, he'll tell us.
Gotta point it out.
Like down to a kick drum on Willie Nelson's All of Me on his Stardust album.
Why?
Oh, so good. But it's interesting you've mentioned that, and now I will only hear that next time I listen to this track.
Oh, Jeremy's also good at making you hear something you didn't notice
Right.
before.
Right.
It's the most useful skill that he has, I think.
Yeah, ruining everyone's fun.
It segues nicely into what I wanted to talk about, which is like you really have an ear for music, which is very similar to Henry Stone, the founder of TK Records.
Yeah, Jeremy, have you ever thought about launching a disco label?
I mean, it at least sounds like a good fake intro.
You're right.
I mean, I wouldn't discount it because, like, Henry Stone, he was like a legendary record executive and producer and had a lot of success. Like, before TK Records, he was one of the first people to record Ray Charles, James Brown, Sam and Dave, and obviously had a pretty remarkable career and had that, everyone said, sort of had that ear for like what was next in music and could really pinpoint it. And it's kind of interesting because, you know, I kind of think of TK Records as like the beating heart of disco cheese. Like there are so many albums and musicians on this label who released music kind of similar to Rock Your Baby that was sort of the template for this sort of very commercial sounding disco. So after Rock Your Baby, Casey and the Sunshine Band, who, you know, were the people who wrote Rock Your Baby and every track on the album, they released Get Down Tonight, That's the Way I Like It, and other really huge disco hits. And it's interesting to think about the timeline. Like Rock Your Baby was released in like May 1974. And then by January 1975, Get Down Tonight was released. And then later that same year in June, That's the Way I Like It was released. So you can just imagine like hit after hit from this label and how, you know, obviously that was a hugely successful for them, but it kind of solidified them as this, in this very particular disco sound at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I did want to mention the players. As we said, they're Casey and the Sunshine Band. On drums, we have Robert Johnson, not to be confused with the blues legend. And there's actually a whole Eugene Chadbourne, avant-garde musician and writer for allmusic.com. I think sometime in the early 2000s, he seems to have gone through and distinguished all the different musicians named Robert Johnson that are out there from one another, because I found a little article he wrote on this Robert Johnson, drummer for Casey and the Sunshine Band. One of the distinctions with this musician is that his nickname was Shotgun, and Casey and the Sunshine Band actually had a track called Shotgun Shuffle where he showed off some of his drumming skills. But I found that fascinating that Eugene Chadbourne seems to have spent some time going through, and because it could get very confusing with all the different Robert Johnsons out there.
Would you say that Eugene Chadbourne is the most famous musician to regularly perform with a rake?
Yeah, I think he invented the electric rake as an instrument. And you've played a show with him, Sean.
Yeah, it was fun.
Wow.
Nice guy. Kind of weird, you know, but nice guy.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect nothing but weirdness. Actually, that's the funniest thing is his articles are written in a very scholarly kind of voice. So,
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those outsider noise musicians where when you really listen, you get the impression like, oh, this guy could be playing normal music really well, but he is just specifically choosing to play weird stuff.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah, that's the really baffling thing with some of those most avant-garde musicians. They're masters of their instrument. Maybe they just got bored of it. And they invent the electric rake.
Gotta look this up later. I have no idea who you're talking about, but this sounds different.
Oh, it is different. He's been at it a long time. So going back to more normal music after that little detour into Eugene Chadbourne.
Right.
He's a great writer for allmusic.com, though. So yeah, Robert Shotgun Johnson on drums. On bass, as well as some drums, we have Richard Finch, who also wrote, I think he co-wrote all the songs with the keyboardist Harry Wayne Casey of Casey and the Sunshine Band. On guitar, Jerome Smith, as well as Philip Wright, who turns out to be brother of the aforementioned Betty Wright.
Oh.
So that connection of Betty Wright helping them get signed to Henry Stone's former label before TK, the Alston label. Obviously, they were still in good. I mean, Betty Wright is a Florida musician. I have no sense if Betty Wright is someone we could ever cover. Do you, Sean?
I mean, like a 45 episode or maybe some of the disco LPs. But yeah, a lot of her material is a little bit outside of our price range.
That's what I thought. So yeah, this was produced, arranged, and written by Harry Wayne Casey and Richard Finch. So it is a low-key Casey and the Sunshine Band album with the beautiful vocals of George McCrae on top.
I just think this album, it's good, and I think people should listen to it. But I think what really interests me about it is just how it's kind of this disco artifact. Like, I think about the disco that I really like, the Nile Rodgers, New York City funk disco, Larry Levan, Paradise Garage disco. And then I think of this, and I feel like this version of disco is one that I've really been hesitant to get into because it's so commercial, it's so formulaic, or it's got that like template, but it does, like, you listen to it and you do want to get up and dance. It works, there's a reason why it did so well.
Yeah.
But it does, to me, it's like in this sort of long arc of history, when you look back at like the 70s and the disco era, like this is the music that people think about. It's like this and ABBA and the Bee Gees. This is the disco that would have been playing on the radio and would have had everyone, this is what most people think about when they think about disco.
And it's interesting to hear that template that became so overplayed in the coming next few years when it's still fresh and exciting.
Right. Like, imagine hearing these songs for the first time. Like, how exciting it would have been to hear That's the Way I Like It in June 1975 versus like now, where it's like, yeah, I hear it at a wedding. It's fine.
Right.
and of course I dance because it's like there's something about it where like I've got that like teenager music cynic brain where I'm like, this is terrible, I don't like it. But then, as I'm much older and maybe more mature, I listen to it or I hear it and I see other people really liking it, and I'm like, yeah, that's great. Like, people like this music. It's really brings people together. It may not be the most complex, like interesting music, but it makes you dance, and that's worth something.
It sure is.
It sounds like the mentality of someone who would have found George McCrae by way of Yo La Tengo.
Guilty as charged.
Same. I'm looking in the mirror here.
Well, Sean, disco being an extremely valuable genre in the record world.
Mm-hmm. Lining the walls, the top dollar shelves.
It's probably pretty difficult for you to find some recommended similar albums this week, right?
I put the work in, though. Like, I've been listening back to some of our episodes, and I realized that you guys actually asked me for this every single episode. So I was like, man, I should get that prepared ahead of time, maybe.
Jeremy didn't even frame it as if he was surprising you.
Yeah, I'm also ready to move past that.
You're over that bit.
The season's not done yet. We have to ride out the season, Jeremy.
2 more episodes.
So close.
Yeah, other seasons we've had other themes, like games that we've played. We kind of dropped that to just, pretend that we're surprising Sean with this segment. It's hopefully it's a fan favorite.
Yeah, well, apparently the ride's almost over.
Let us know how you feel. I'd buy that podcast at gmail.com.
Anyway, if you like this George McCrae album, here's a few that you can also check out and find on the cheap. We've talked about Casey and the Sunshine Band a lot, and I think their self-titled album from 1975 is pretty great. It's got a very similar sound to this. They do 1 or 2 of the same tracks, and that was an album I kind of avoided for a while in disco, thinking that it was too commercial, pop-friendly, cheesy, etc., as we've said, but they were a great band, writing some great songs. I mean, they had their formulas, but it's a fun album you can still find for fairly cheap.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of copies out there.
Yes, it sold very well. Next one, another guy who sold very well in his day, Van McCoy. I'm recommending his album Disco Baby from 1975. For my money, only his first couple albums I think are really speak to me. After that, he gets a little bit too far into the shiny commercial disco, but a great producer and songwriter, and definitely very influential for the sound of disco.
He's the Hustle, right?
Yes. And last recommendation, another album that you listen to it and you just assume, oh, this was got to be a 1977, 78, like peak disco album. But LaBelle's Nightbirds from 1974 featuring the big hit Lady Marmalade. It's a 1974 album. It was really one of the most influential early disco sounds.
I was looking at some charts from 1974, 1975, and Lady Marmalade was a huge hit right at the same time as this album.
That's right. You turn on the right radio station, 1974, you get to hear those tracks back to back.
Incredible. What a time to be alive.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I was like 5-6 years away from life. Well, before we get to our last song, Lauren, would you like to plug anything for our listeners?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for
Perhaps a podcast.
Yes, I have a podcast of my very own. I was inspired after being on this one so many times. I was like, I can do this. So it's not a music related podcast. It's a podcast more related to what I do as a career in learning design. It's called How'd You Learn To? And we interview people who have interesting learning journeys to understand how they went from being interested in something to developing mastery. We have our second season coming out in the fall, and I'm really excited to share that this season we've interviewed a DJ, so we'll get to learn a lot about their expertise in music. But yeah, How'd You Learn To Pod? We're on Instagram, and you can find us on Spotify.
Yeah, it's a great show. Some of the professions that you explore are ones that I never even considered that people might do as a profession.
Yeah, we interviewed a tea sommelier last season, and this season we've got a wine sommelier. So yeah, we kind of go all over the place.
Is there going to be a sommelier every season? How far can we go?
I mean,
with that?
that's the plan. Maybe we'll get a weed
coffee?
sommelier or coffee. I'm sure we'll find someone every season. If you have any recommendations, or I don't know, a record sommelier perhaps.
We'll find out if that's a thing.
Oh, it's a thing for sure.
Peter and I are kind of Oreo sommeliers.
That's true.
I remember, right. Okay, wait. What's your favorite Oreo flavor? And not the original. Like, what's your go-to? If you could have your choice.
Java chip.
Yeah, Java chip's the one I think we both go to most.
Well, I didn't even know that was we don't have those in Canada. That's crazy.
Yeah, you guys just have all dressed Oreos up there, right?
Ketchup chip Oreos, perhaps. Can I interest you in a ketchup flavored Oreo in these troubling times? Probably not. Probably
Yum.
not.
Ooh, pickle flavored Oreos.
Don't
No.
knock it till you try it.
Well, fantastic. Yes, we recommend to our listeners to go check out How'd You Learn To and learn how people learn to. So we were going to feature a favorite of both Sean and Lawrence to go out on, right, y'all?
Yeah.
I Get Lifted.
Yeah, we've been saying that, this isn't a perfect album. There's some formulaic songs. He did Rock Your Baby like 4 or 5 different times under different titles. But the good songs on this album are as good as anything out there. And I Get Lifted, I think, is my favorite song on here. Also, for all the songs that are actually about sex, it's nice to have one that's maybe actually about smoking weed. It might also just be about sex, too. I don't know. But
Open for interpretation, for sure.
Now, you mentioned, Sean, that Gwen McCrae has been sampled a whole lot.
yeah.
But this song has been sampled quite a bit. It was most prominently, perhaps, sampled in Snoop Dogg, at the time, Snoop Doggy Dogg, 1993, Gin and Juice.
As referenced in your intro.
as referenced in my intro, of course. But it's also been sampled by artists like Pete Rock, Keith Murray, 50 Cent, DJ Quick, Tim Dog, Compton's Most Wanted. The Casey and the Sunshine Band version has also been heavily sampled. And it's the very intro that people seem to like to sample. It's, nice bare percussion and bass. That's
Yeah. It's kind of the hardest funk sound that you're going to get on this album.
definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've said all we can, and we just got to hit them with that I Get Lifted now, guys.
Let's play it. Nice.
Thank you so much for listening to I'd Buy That for $1. I'm co-host Peter.
I'm Jeremy.
I'm co-host Sean.
And I'm Lauren.
So hip together, baby, we're all alone. Now I can tell you